At the beginning of 2020, I grew this interest in piecing together my family tree. It started out with wanting to know where I came from, without doing any expensive DNA testing. The farther I got into the tree, the more people I wanted to know, until I came across one of my great-grandmothers that was lost in time. My mother, my grandma, and I would spend the next month trying to discover who my great-great-grandma is and why the tree stops growing there.
We are diving into our past and our ancestors, which has been absolutely fascinating. It's just sort of this fun exploration through time. These people that if they didn't exist, if they didn't even perhaps live in that house, or if they weren't drafted in the war on the exact day they were, something in history would have gone differently and we wouldn't be here. I guess there's always an unknown about who's missing. You don't know who's missing. Maybe, there's a family of 13 and you thought 12 was the family size. I think you're always wondering, is there someone missing? And in this particular case, of course, I know about my great-grandmother. She is definitely missing on the record. So it's a curiosity of knowing someone that isn't there, that we're not finding any record on. So I think it makes the hunt a little more mysterious. It makes it a little more fun. It makes it worthwhile.
The tree starts with me, then my mother Christine, and her mother Janice. Then we know Janice's mother is Margaret Krieger, who married Frank Steiger.
I knew my mother's 3 sisters, and there was a stepsister, and that was Arlene, and Dolores was my mother's half-sister, and Elizabeth was the oldest, and Florence, of the 3 children, was the youngest before Dolores was born.
We did a lot of research on Ancestry.com. The website gives you easy access to look at censuses, birth certificates, death certificates, and marriage licenses.
We know that in the 1920 census, all 3 of the girls were living alone with their father in Milwaukee, and they also had a servant and a boarder, probably the servant age 34 and a child of hers age around 11 or 12. And they were all in the household together. My mother, speaking of her grandma, calls her Katherine.
However, we couldn't find anything that matched Katherine Krieger, and we have no idea what her maiden name could have been.
She passed away young, soon after childbirth, and it was in the 1918 influenza. 1919 she passed away, but we can't seem to find many records on her, and I'm not sure why, and she may have gone by a different name. But indeed, my grandma's middle name was Katherine, and we believed her mom's name to be Katherine. So we're still sleuthing around and digging for Katherine.
She was buried in a cemetery, I can't remember, it's Wandering Rest or something, but it was on the northeast side of Milwaukee, and we would go visit her grave. Unfortunately, there was a bad storm, and many of the graves were moved, and the whole cemetery got demolished. So I don't know where she is. My grandfather on my mother's side was buried at, I don't know, there was a cemetery someplace off of Capitol on 90th or something. It was a long time ago.
The name of this cemetery is also called Wanderer's Rest, and that could be what Mom was saying.
What we did find was Jacob Krieger's gravestone, and we hoped that maybe Katherine would be buried in the same cemetery, but there was no Katherine to be found.
My mom said that she did have a number of vital records of my grandparents and possibly their parents. I think we'd have to do some digging, and I've already done a little bit of digging in the back of a closet in my parents' house and found a few things, found some tax returns of my grandparents and their social security numbers. So maybe that's just a rabbit hole we can go down and see if we can discover something with that.
So if you can help us find any of these like certificates or any paperwork or
Yeah.
anything with names on it.
Yeah,
That'd be
I know I had something of my mother's, but I don't remember where I put all this stuff.
It's like Register of Deeds. This could be a death certificate. Yep, original certification of death. Okay. So this is the original certificate of death for Grandma, your mom. But notice her mom's name. What's it here?
Margaret Katherine
Margareta Klingler
Klingler.
was her maiden name.
Yes.
So there's no Katherine, is there? Do you think you just thought of the name Katherine since that was Grandma's middle name?
Yeah,
Maybe?
maybe.
After we found that certificate, we wanted to do some more research on Ancestry to see if we could find any records of her. So this is a 1910 census, which looks like it has a William Krieger, Sarah Krieger, Louis Krieger, Margaret Krieger, David Krieger. I don't know if that's her. Gender female, age 15. Birthplace, New York. Yeah, I don't know if that's her. No, that's not her.
We can't seem to find her on the 1910 census. However, my grandma being born in 1911 would place her mother obviously alive in 1910. And she had already given birth to my grandmother's sister, Elizabeth.
Here, look. This is Ohio marriage records. Spouse Jacob Krieger, mother Margareta Ludwig, father Mike. Birth at Hungary about 1892. That's around her day. 1889, that sounds about right. We found a marriage license for her and Jacob Krieger and with their parents' names on it. We found out that both families came over from Hungary and settled near Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the late 1800s. When we went into the attic and found that death certificate, we also found pictures from around the 1930s. It seems that the Krieger family went to a beach and took a bunch of photos of that picnic. Seeing those photos, seeing the family together, it just made us feel like we were giving life to people who would have been otherwise forgotten.
Early 30s.
Early 30s, I wasn't around then. Let me see.
She never recognized that dog?
No. Look at these outfits.
Look at your mom. She looks like you.
My mom knew that we had to see if we could find any pictures of Jacob, or especially Margareta.
Okay, I just found everybody. I found Jacob and Margareta and Elizabeth, Margaret, and Florence, and all of their birth dates. Just so happened to be included in here.
Where did you find that? What, down there?
Yeah.
That is so good. Mother, good job.
Oh my gosh.
I'm so glad you had that, Grandma.
Father died December 31st, 1936, sure enough. Born in 1892. February 13th. Wow. I think this looks like my grandma and her sister, her two sisters, and that does look like Jacob. According to this picture.
It was impressive to see that for the family photo of Jacob, Margareta, Elizabeth, Margaret, and Florence, they put a picture of Margareta in after the family photo was taken. So we know that this photo was taken after Margareta had died in 1919.
Grade in 1919. Grave index. Wait a minute. I think that's
Glen
her.
Oaks.
I think that's her. We're in Milwaukee. Glen Oaks Cemetery.
My mother and I wanted to make one last trip to the Glen Oaks Cemetery to go see Margareta. I think it's important to know where you come from. Seeing those graves at Glen Oaks Cemetery, falling apart, stuck in trees that grew over them, these people have been dead 100 years, and they are forgotten. We were glad to finally find Katherine so that her spirit would know that she is not forgotten.